and you play it out, and you can set the detents on the little tiny diving planes, like a submarine, and you dive it down to a depth above the wreck, and then it streams back data to your computer, and you basically leave it there like a little loitering drone doing your ghost hunting for you, because you can't spend all that time down the bottom. You can't stay down there with air all day long. You've got to come up. So it can loiter. It can relay information to you. We do a lot of remote work. Very, very important. These drones are great. The new generation drone is phenomenal. And the payload capacities are basically endless. Now, this is a Gen 1. They're not cheap to manufacture, but they work. Some store-bought Gen 1s are about $30K a piece, so they're not cheap. But they work real well. And, you can have a magnetometer in these things, and you can find ship's anchors that can lead to lots of buried treasure. A lot of things cross over that we do. And you've got to get your technology out there for you to find anything. Of course, they don't have to cost you that much if you figured out how to make them. But that takes a long time in your R&D. There's a lot of cost involved in that. That's for sure. That's where I tend to put most of our corporate focus is in R&D. But you can't ever stop with that. That's the best money spent. That's for sure. Now, this is an older prototype for actually a lift vehicle. And sometimes we don't have the option of saying, hey, did you forget the cord? Did you forget the camera? So somebody's got to bring it up and down. Because you can't yo-yo. You can't go from the surface down 150 feet and back up to get that camera and back down 150 feet because you can get the bends. You can't do that. You've got a dial to consider. So we use lift vehicles. Baskets, nets, things get filled in, you fill it up, you get on the horn, you call over Lord, you say, hey, I forgot, whatever I forgot. I forgot my plastic jar with my EMF detector in it. Okay, so the guy goes and he can place it in essentially the lift station, which is like an elevator, and you can drop it up, you can drop it down to the diver, and that's what this particular unit is. This is one of the older prototypes. What we found happened with this one is that it spun like a top. It was too susceptible, so we ended up making it a lot longer, and it works great now. But you never know till you make it. We had a guy weld up an aluminum cage, took a lot of work, had to weld it up in such a way that it wouldn't rust or oxidize. We had special skids with shocks made and all these different things. These are buoyancy chambers. You have to let air in, you have to let air out, you have to make sure it doesn't go off kilter, all those things. And then you send it down the bottom, and then you find out that it spins like a top and wraps the umbilicus all to hell, and it's not worth a hoot. So that's how these things work, but you never know till you deploy. And that's what we do. Another Gen 1 shot. Basically, we were going to bring the Gen 2 along, but the reason I didn't is because when they make up these fins for us, they're susceptible to being kicked or broken, and it's something that, 1,000-mile drive isn't necessarily something you want this bouncing around on. I wish I could have brought it along, but I had to make the call to keep it in the rubber holder that it's in, because I just really can't afford to go out and get a whole no-tail section on one. But this is what they look like, and that's why I brought a few pictures. It's kind of neat. And the new Gen 2s have an actual belly cupola on them that looks like those little radar cupolas that you'll see on some of the drones that they use in Afghanistan and such. It's really quite neat. Now this is one of the DPV models. This is the elongated, enhanced version of the one that spun like a top. And this one floats and sinks very nicely. This particular system is great. It's got sonar pods on the sides. It carries all sorts of electronics. It's got its own air source in case a diver runs out of air. They can come up and breathe off of this. It's got, right now we're making a robotic arm for the front. It's got camera mounts front and back. It's really, really neat. This is the future of what we do. They're really robust, essentially made out of a PVC-like material, and you can just beat them to death underwater, and that's important. We did everything from aluminum to to different types of plastics, and a lot of things became brittle. And this one works really, really well. I'm real happy with it. Now, continuing education. Jim, where are you? Yeah, haven't we heard enough about continuing education?
Oh, yeah.
God. NAUI, our diving fraternity, is all about continuing education. They're always like, talk about the education. So I'm going to talk about the education. Almost don't want to, but you have to continually educate. We're taking a ride in a deco chamber. This is a 6-atmosphere deco chamber. What this is that if you go down to a certain depth and you ascend too quickly and you have some free nitrogen that's actually released into your blood, into your tissues of your body, you can get the bends. We call it DCS, decompression sickness. And if you have DCS, you have to go in a decompression chamber and you have to take a ride in a decompression chamber for a number of hours where they actually repressurize you to depth in the chamber and you stay there a while. And it actually pressurizes everything back to normal, and then they bleed the pressure off so that the nitrogen can come out of your system so that you're no longer bent. Now, what is the bends? Well, the bends is important to note. Back in the day when they were building bridges, or rather tunnels, like the tunnel, under the Hudson River and different tunnels in New York, the workers were called caisson workers. They would take them down these giant cement elevators down to the bottom, and they would work underground, under the water, under pressure, without knowing it. They didn't know they were under the pressure of all of that water. So they're down there, and they're pressurized by all the atmospheric pressure on top. And then when they were brought up, they brought them up in an elevator. And these guys bent. Okay, all of a sudden they got these pains in their shoulders and all their joints, and they bent. And they're walking around, like we, after we go diving, we do this, but it's not because we have the bends, it's because we're old. And we're like this. It's like, yeah, that was a great dive, man, let's do it again, like this. And we're like this. And we're doing it the other day, we walked to Hardee's, and Jim and I are walking like this out of the car. Jesus, man, you look terrible. He's like, yeah, you do. So anyhow, so they're bent. And they come up bent, they look like these little trolls. And so they call it caisson's disease, and they found out it was the bends. Well, we're susceptible to the bends. It's important. So, you've got to learn how to take a ride in a chamber. You've got to know what a chamber is. You've got to educate yourself about these things, and we do that all the time. These, of course, are some of our divers doing just that. It's important. It's got to do with the paranormal because it's all wrapped up in it. That's what makes the darn thing so fascinating to me. Now, we've got a lot of support. We do underwater archaeology, cryptozoology, anthropology, and we do forensic search and recovery. Okay? They're all completely different disciplines. If you find bones in a haunted location, are they fresh or old? You need to know. Jerry is a forensic odontologist. He's also a diver. He knows his stuff. If he finds teeth, he can tell you if they're from a super robust Australopith or whether it's from Joe the Exterminator. They can tell you who it is. They can tell you all those things. That's important to know. We've got a lot of support crew, and these guys are really, really beneficial. Without support, we wouldn't be able to do squat. Because even for every one diver, it takes 2 or 3 support people. We never forget that. That's super duper important. Guys, actually, some of the old Jerry's almost 80. He's a damn good diver, that's for sure. Now, this is me about 5 years ago with a Gen 1 sonar. This is one of the first basic answers to the EMF detector in a bucket. This was the first one. And we learned a heck of a lot. I always keep this picture in there because it's nostalgic to me. And I think we learned more on this one deep dive on a wreck than anything. We learned that even though you can keep a recorder, a hydrophone actually, from rupturing externally, you can't keep the air inside the little tiny diodes on that circuit board from doing it. That's what we learned, because it stops working. And then someone says, well, you crushed it internally, and you look and it's perfect. It's not. It's not. Everything in that little board just crunches. And you'll never even see it with the human eye, but that's something that we learned and had to deal with, very important. Then we went to the big boy, the big eye in the sky, the one capable of holding a hard drive. That's cool. Parabolic dish, loiters over a wreck, listens down, listens to the left and right, and you can hear everything down there. Now, how do you know what you're listening to? Let's get into, just about now, let's get into ghosts. How do you know what you're listening to? Well, you have to know what you're not hearing. It's important. Perfect analogy. You go to Mars, and you're a ghost hunter, and you take your little ball of kite string and an EMF or a tape recorder, like your Olympus, and you drop it through the atmosphere with your ball of kite string, with your thumb on it, and you drop it down over the planet, and you're listening to the planet, and you hear something that's like that, and you reel your kite string up, and you go flying back to Earth, and you say, I found something paranormal. Well, you can't do that. You'd be a moron, right? Because you don't know what the heck the planet sounds like to start with. Isn't that true? You don't know. Well, curiously, some people came up to me a couple of years ago and said, we're going to do this thing called the Titanic Project. And I'm like, oh, Jesus, all right, okay. And they're like, we're going to take a recorder and drop it down the Titanic and listen to it and tell you if there's ghosts. And I'm like, well, let me figure this out here. And I told the guy, I said, your cable's about this big. And 100 feet of cable weighs 60 pounds. And you're dropping it down 11,000 feet. So your spool's going to weigh about 4 tons. And how big's your boat? Okay, and what are you going to, like, thumb it off the side? Like, oh Jesus, you know, that 4,000-pound spool just slipped out of my fingers. Okay? And I said, and by the way, that 100 feet of cord I got right here, that cost me $500. Okay? I said, so you're going to have 11,000 feet at $500 100 feet? So, well, that sounds like it's, you know, that's not cheap. Oh, well, we're not going to do that. We're going to use a string. Oh, so you're in the North Sea, and you've got a kite string and a 30-foot current, or 30-knot current. So you drop it in like this, and it's angling off the boat, just like this string is here, because it's probably dropping about 1 inch for every 30 feet it goes out. And you got to go down 11,000 feet. So your ball of kite string doesn't weigh 12,000 pounds, it weighs 50,000 pounds. Okay? So that's where I'm going here. All right? You can't just do this. And you can't just say, if you do take your ball of yarn and drop that thing down there, you can't say, I heard something abnormal. Because you don't know what the Titanic sounds like when it is normal. You don't know what like I said, what a grouper sounds like when he goes. You've heard him, right, Billy?
Yes.
How many times have we been in a wreck and you hear one of those things?
Every time.
Every time. Okay. How many times have you heard ghost shrimp on the hull? Like, how many times? And if you say, if you say, is anyone here? And you ask, is anyone here? You know, next thing you know, that's Bob. Bob, help me, it's Bob. Okay? You can't do that. But people do that. And it's really lame. Okay? So, you've got to know what you're listening to. So what did we do? We listened to it. We listened to it. People will say, well, Jesus, this paranormal diving is a bore because we're not looking at any ghosts. And I said, well, you've got 1 million fish species, and we've got to listen to them all, And if you listen to 10 fish species a dive, how many dives are going to take you till you've heard them all? Right? Okay? It's not glamorous. It's important. Somebody's got to do the legwork. Somebody's got to. And the legwork's part of what we do. Just like you can't sit in the opera house and say something's paranormal until you know what it sounds like for someone to speak in a low voice, a medium voice, and a loud voice in the alley to the left, and the same from the alley to the right, and sample all three of those voices from both sides, from every part of the place first.